put a little disclaimer on things as I start this morning. For those of you that were here last week, Becky and I had a discussion like we usually do about the sermon. And you have to recognize that one of my majors in college was history. And so I have a tendency, if I'm not careful, to get too heavily involved into the history side of these lessons. So I will endeavor to stay away from that and deal more with other matters in this particular occasion. Today we are going to look at a church that is very unique. Out of the 7 churches of Asia, Smyrna was the only church about which Jesus had nothing negative to say. Everything that was said about them, though there were some very difficult things they had to deal with, were all things that were good in their own particular way. In Revelation 20 and verse 6, "Blessed and holy are those who are included in the first time that people come back to life. The second death has no power over them. They will continue to be priests of God in Christ, and they will rule with him for 1,000 years. There's a lot of different teaching that goes on in regard to that, and I'm not going to get into that. Basically, the idea that I want to set forth in this is that there is a time coming when there will be another life, and that will be one that will be far superior to this. But a little bit of history about Smyrna. You need to understand a little bit about it. It was one of the first cities that became Christian, and it was one of the ones that lasted the longest. It lasted, in fact, to the year 1427 or 24, when it fell to the Muslims after the Crusades. It was, of the 7 churches of Asia, it was the one that lasted the longest. In fact, it was a major seaport city. It was a major trade center. And at one time, they had, in the side of the mountain that was there, they had a theater that would seat 20,000 people. So this was not just a little rinky-dink type of a town. It had a medical school and a school of science. Their universities of their time at that particular point. The streets were broad. It was one of the best, in fact, in the Roman Empire. It was acknowledged as being one of the primary cities. It even had temples built to Zeus and Cybele and to Tiberius Caesar and his mother. So it was as far as the Romans were concerned, it was a major city. And it had a great many things that were important there. But there were a lot of things that the church had there that were not all that great. In the 2nd chapter now, in Revelation, beginning in verse 9, "I know how you are suffering, how poor you are, but you are rich. I also know that those who claim to be Jews slander you. They are the synagogue of Satan. Don't be afraid of what you're going to suffer. The devil is going to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested. Your suffering will go on for 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let the person who has ears listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. Everyone who wins the victory will never be hurt by the second death." We'll deal with the second death toward the close. But in particular, this letter is directed, as you might anticipate, and as the previous letter was, and in each one of them, in fact, in the 8th verse here in the 2nd chapter, "To the messenger of the church in Smyrna write, the first and the last, who was dead and became alive." Now, of course, that is Jesus that's doing the speaking. And as we mentioned last week, the messenger of the church, in the Greek, it's called, the word is angelos, which means angel or messenger. And of course, in the various versions that you see, it's also translated messenger in many cases. But the basic fundamental idea of this seems to be that it was the messenger that would have to be, and discounting the idea that many have, that churches have individual angels assigned to them, that this is more than likely a reference to the eldership of that particular congregation. And in fact, of all of these congregations, because they all would essentially have had elders at this particular time, particularly at this point in history. Because the book of Revelation was written sometime depending, of course, on whose ideas you accept, but the probability is that it was written sometime between 90 and 93. So the church had been in existence for some 60 years at this point and had become pretty well established in many locations. Smyrna was not one of the places where it was not firmly established, as we'll see from the comments and as the things that Jesus had to say about it. So it was a strong congregation, and the elders, of course, as is still a requirement basically, is that they are to serve as leading, as far as leading against the different problems and difficulties that arise as far as the church is concerned, and to make spiritual decisions and accept spiritual responsibility for the congregation. So in this way is also one of the major reasons for assuming that the angelos in this particular reference is to the elders of the church, because they were the ones that had the responsibility to see that the church was involved in doing the things it was supposed to do. And that message, of course, applies today as well. So as we look at this and as we think about this, we encounter a variety of things. In the 9th verse, as we read previously, Jesus stated, "I know how you're suffering, how poor you are, but you are rich." He knows their situation. He knows what's going on with them. He understands, and that's what this is intended to communicate to the church there. That I know you're having difficulty. I'm aware of what it is. And I know that you have been able to deal with it. You've been able to achieve and accomplish the things that need to be done here. So as we look at that and we think about it, we find also in Revelation 1:18 this statement that points out the fact that Jesus was aware. "The living one, I was dead, but now I'm alive. I have the keys of death and of hell." So the one that that's addressing this message to them, of course, is Christ, and the reference here is to show that that's precisely who it is. So Christ knows what they're facing. He knows what the difficulties are, and he is aware that they're being poor. In this instance, it's evident from the way in which it is written that poor refers to financially. That this congregation was populated by members who were not well off financially. And the great probability here is because of the persecution that went on here. Based on what we have here revealed to us, it's the fact that this church probably suffered as much persecution as was likely to be found anywhere. One of the early church leaders was a native of this particular city, and he was an elder in the church at Smyrna. His name was Polycarp, and the Jews burned him alive there. In fact, they gathered the wood on the Sabbath day to build the fire to burn him. So that gives you an idea when Jesus refers to it as the synagogue of Satan, exactly how they felt. And of course, in their particular viewpoint, they were probably like the Apostle Paul. They probably thought that they were doing God's will and that they were getting rid of a heretic. So probably in a large extent, the fact that the people there were not well off financially could very well have been the result of the fact that they were being persecuted as they were, and that they had difficulty making a living. But they still obviously persisted in doing that and were successful. The church, as we say, it hung on there longer than any of the other 7 churches of Asia. It was there until almost the time of Columbus. So this tells you that this was a congregation that had their act together. And in spite of the fact that they were suffering heavily from persecution and all, they were being successful in the efforts that they were making. And they made some real progress from this particular standpoint. So as we recognize this and see it, we recognize also that the congregation that was enduring all of this was not a lonesome, you might say, arrangement as far as churches of this particular time were concerned. In the second chapter of the second book of Corinthians, the 8th chapter, while they were being severely tested by suffering, their overflowing joy, along with their extreme poverty, has made them even more generous. And this was talking about sending relief to the churches that were in Judea. But Paul is speaking here to the church at Corinth and writing about them and saying that they were overflowing with joy, even though they were suffering and that they had extreme poverty. So the fact that the church at Smyrna was one that was not very well off financially was not particularly unusual that particular time. The brethren obviously had problems in maintaining a living, and part of that might have been the fact that many of them were probably Jewish, and so as a result of this, the Jewish community helped persecute them. In fact, historically, the Jews persecuted them more there than the Romans did. So it was a real severe situation. Of course, Paul encountered this kind of persecution on a number of occasions in different places where he had to go from one town to another in order to escape from that particular problem. In fact, in the book of James, we have in the 2nd chapter and 5th verse, "Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, didn't God choose poor people in the world to become rich in faith and to receive the kingdom that he promised to those who love him?" And if you note, it is usually among the poorer people that we have the most success as far as reaching out to them, particularly with the gospel. And this is true throughout the world. Wherever you go, it is inevitably people that are not very well off financially that make their initial movement as far as accepting Christ. So nothing has really changed in that. And of course, the problem usually is the result that those that are well off materially, they tend to put their confidence and their trust in material things. And because of that, they're not too interested in things that are spiritual. And certainly that has been true, and it will continue to be true, I'm confident, until the Lord comes. In Hebrews, the 10th chapter, in the 3rd and 4th verse, you suffered as prisoners. You were cheerful even though your possessions were stolen, since you know that you have a better and more permanent possession. So even the Hebrew writer is talking to, and in particular this instance, to Jewish Christians, individuals that have had their material things stolen from them even. So in spite of the fact that we tend to look at the first century and think that it was a pretty good time as far as the church was concerned, the reality there was a lot of rough going as far as the church and its involvement in the world at that particular time. There was a lot of persecution. There were a lot of people that were really suffering and suffering heavily. And of course, the Romans didn't make it any easier by their persecution and blaming the problems that they had. It's sort of a similar approach to what Hitler took during the Second World War period of time, when he blamed the Jews for everything, and everybody joined in basically to that thinking process. It appears that the Romans and the Jews worked together to blame the Christians for everything that went wrong. So it's everybody wants somebody to hate, and so the Christians happened to be handy at that time, and so that was just what people did. They hung on to the ideas that the Christians were the cause of all the problems they were having. And if you look at it today, if you look at what's going on in our country today, who are the individuals that get the criticism for most of the things that aren't quite like they ought to be and all that? It's these crazy Christian people, these people that believe that the Bible is actually something that God wrote, and they're down on all these people that are just naturally living their lives the way they want to, and they're just normal people. And so got to be Christians. They've got to be the trouble. They've got to be the problem as far as the country is concerned. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul told Timothy, tell them to do good, to do a lot of good things, to be generous and to share. So just as these churches were willing to help those that were poor, so this was the thing that was being taught at the time. It said, even though you may not be well off financially, be willing to share what you have and to provide it for those that have a need. And the reality is, of course, that Christ is aware of what's going on, and he will take care of us on that basis. But also, there's going to be a reckoning for those individuals that were the synagogue of Satan. In the 3rd chapter, in verses 8 through 10, I know what you have done. See, I have opened the door in front of you, that no one can shut. You only have a little strength, but you have paid attention to my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are in Satan's synagogue come and bow at your feet and realize that I have loved you. They claim that they are Jewish, but they are lying. Because you have obeyed my command to endure, I will keep you safe during the time of testing which is coming to the whole world to test those living on earth. So we are also told something here that's borne out, and as those of you who were involved in our study in Revelation are aware, that the times are going to come when things are not going to be going all that great for Christians, but the thing that we have that we can hold on to is that the testing time is one that we will be able to endure if we hang in there. And in Revelation 2 and verse 10, don't be afraid of what you're going to suffer, speaking to Smyrna. The devil is going to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested. Your suffering will go on for 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. So they were having a bad time at Smyrna. And Jesus says it's not getting better. It's going to continue to be a bad time. So a lot of times we have Christians who think that for some reason or other, the world is supposed to treat you nice. It's supposed to be good to you. It's supposed to let you do whatever you want to do, and that everything will be sweet and great and wonderful, and you have the job of your dreams and all of these kind of things. And when that doesn't happen, you say, what's wrong? The Lord has let us down. No, that's not the promise that's made to us, just like it was to Smyrna. The time is coming when you're going to be faced with some difficulty. In Acts 16:33, after that, they hit Paul and Silas many times. They threw them in jail and ordered the jailer to keep them under tight security. So it didn't matter if you were an apostle, if you were busily involved in doing what the Lord wanted you to do, you still could end up locked up, beaten, and put into jail. And just like the Lord promised Smyrna, the time is coming. He says 10 days. A lot of debate about that, depending on who you look at. It can be 10 days, literally. It can be 10 years, if you consider it from that particular standpoint, or 10 being a complete number. It could be a life sentence. But the reality is that they're being told that a time of testing is coming, and it's going to be an experience that you might not want to really like to have. But nevertheless, you need to hang in there. You need to be faithful. You need to continue to hold to your faith, recognizing that Jesus knows what's going on. He knows what you're enduring, and the reward is going to come when it's all over, in spite of whatever else might have taken place. In Matthew 24:9, Jesus tells Christians in advance, then they will hand you over to those who will torture and kill you. All nations will hate you because you are committed to me. Now, does that sound like he's promising that everything's going to be great? Everything's going to be wonderful, so you need to jump on board on the Christian bandwagon because things are going to be really good for you. Jesus says that you're going to be tortured, that you're going to be persecuted, and that because if you're committed to him, people are going to look down on you. Well, hello world, what's going on today? I think we can say that Jesus was pretty accurate in what he was saying, because it is steadily becoming less and less popular in this country in particular to be a Christian. And so what's going to happen, do you suppose? Those who are Christians who are just Christians nominally are going to suddenly be absent. They will just fade away into the woodwork because they do not want to be recognized as Christians. They want to keep that particular part of their life a secret. But then in Hebrews 3 and verse 6, but Christ is a faithful son in charge of God's household. We are his household if we continue to have courage and to be proud of the confidence we have. In other words, once again, the statement is made. Things are going to be bad, but you need to hang in there. Now, I don't think anyone here has ever reached the point in their life where everything is gone just like you would like for it to. So what do you do when things get bad? Do you just throw up your hands and lay down and cry, or what? No, you suck it up, as the expression is, and you deal with it. Because that's the option that we have. And as Christians, we have to do the same thing. We have to recognize that we have the ability to meet whatever challenge comes our way. The Lord is not going to let it be more than we can deal with. It might be all we can deal with, but He's going to be there, and He's going to be part of it. But the real challenge and the real question there is, do you believe that? Do you believe what Jesus said to the church at Smyrna? That I'll be with you. If you don't really believe that, then you've got a real problem and some very difficult times coming. Because He is with you, and He will be with you, but you have to hang in there with Him and be faithful as well. In Revelation 2:11, that the person who has ears listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. Everyone who wins the victory will never be hurt by the second death. Now, the second death is something that we want to very definitely avoid, and we'll have a reference to that as we continue on. But nevertheless, we need to recognize that there are things that we have to do, that we have to put our confidence and our trust in the Lord, as we've said, to deal with things that come our way, no matter whether it's things that we like or dislike, or whether it's unhappy or sad or whatever it is. We have to deal with it. There isn't any way around it. There isn't any way to avoid it. It's just part of living your life day by day, and that's reality. In 1 Timothy 4 and verse 8, Paul wrote to Timothy saying, training the body helps a little, but godly living helps in every way. Godly living has the promise of life now and in the world to come. So you have the promise of life in the world today. You have that promise. And the Lord takes care of the things that we need. He provides for us. He provides the things that we need and helps us to be able to live day by day and meet the challenges that we have. And you say, well, I don't think the Lord's really doing that for me. Well, no. How many of us are going to miss a meal today? Well, if you do, it's your own fault because the meal's already here. But the reality is that none of us is on the risk of starvation. None of us is not having a place to go to when services are over here. You're going to have to do as we have in the past on occasion, let people sleep here in the auditorium because they didn't have any place to go. I don't think anybody here qualifies for that. So the reality is that the Lord takes care of the things that we need. And we have to train our bodies sometimes to do the things we need to do and to achieve and accomplish the things that God would have us do. But we talked about the second death. And the final reference you have here, Revelation 21:8, tells you who qualifies for the second death. But cowardly, unfaithful, and detestable people, murderers, sexual sinners, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, will find themselves in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. So what this boils down to is, and you notice that the number 2 thing listed there right behind cowardly is unfaithful. In other words, individuals that profess to be Christians and are living the Christian life, and then they cowardly fall away, they get to enjoy the second death. And the second death is an eternal spiritual death. That's precisely what the book is talking about and precisely what the Lord is saying. So, you become a Christian, you die the first death. From the standpoint, you die spiritually and you're raised to walk in the new life. You are born again. So now you have a second life. Now, you don't want the second death because the second death is the one where you die eternally from a spiritual standpoint. So it's very important that we recognize that that's not the death we want. And if you say, well, what about the person who didn't die spiritually by being baptized into Christ? You die physically. That's your first death for you. And then the second death is the eternal death. So the second death comes through whether you've become a Christian or not. Doesn't make any difference. It's there. There will be 2 deaths. And you either choose to either die here or die there. And dying, of course, is separation from God. So only the church at Smyrna was without condemnation, but they had plenty to deal with. Their plate was full, and it continued to be, and there's no indication that it ever lacked up. No slack was ever given to the church in Smyrna. They continued to fight persecution and problems until the Muslims finally drove them out. So that gives you an idea of what can take place. But they faced those trials, and Jesus promised them that they would have an eternal reward because they met the trials that were before them. And so I would be willing to be confident today that because of the example that they set, that there were those at Smyrna who have received that reward. You can too. All you have to do is be as courageous as those brethren were 21 centuries ago. Live for the Lord, do the things he would have you do, and to serve him. If you fall short, have everyone pray for you and help you in that particular way, in whatever way we can. If you've never begun that journey, and we can begin it today because we have the water here. It's a little chilly, but it won't kill you. And so we can take care of the sin situation very quickly. So basically, the ball is in your court. You decide how you want to play. The Lord is ready and available and willing to do what he can to ensure that you enjoy eternity in a place beyond your imagination. So if we can assist you, though, in obeying the Lord, we want you to have that opportunity to do. Let it be known while we stand and while we sing.
Would you be